Okay. Around 17, 18 questions that we got through a variety of sources. We consolidated a few of them down so that they are going to be a little bit, let's just say, more cohesive. A few of the questions were pretty similar, like, hey, how to train in quarantine and things like that. So essentially, we're just going to be going through these. The video will be posted afterwards. So even, if this is just a go, we are going to just hang out for a few more minutes. Seems like we're getting a few people starting to filter in here. Say hi in the chat if you submitted one of the questions. Let me know. I'll get to yours sooner rather than later, or probably just first or second. But yeah, we got a good bit of interesting ones. So one of the first ones we got was talking about older lifters, what volume sensitive means for them. We had a few people with some pretty specific things, like some meniscus damage, like some cerebral palsy conditions. But I guess we'll just start with the first one. So the first one was going to be a guy named CementHead. So the question is, I am a 55-year-old male, 6'3", 250. Been training the squat, deadlift, and bench press, overhead press for about a year. He did the He's doing one lift a day with assistance exercises. What rep range should I be working the assistance exercises in? I have heard older adults are volume sensitive. So good bit to unpack there. The first thing is going to be, what exactly does volume sensitive mean? The way that I like to think about this is going to be that the mistakes that you can make are going to be a little bit more costly. A master's lifter likely won't be fine come Monday again. So the consequences of your decision making, it's going to be a little bit higher than it normally would be for another age range. On top of that, you have more opportunities through the week to kind of hone in and correct future mistakes, learn to avoid them essentially. So with that, someone who is doing one lift a day for an older guy, that means that, let's say he has, 5 to 7 chances a week to figure out what level of volume works for him. The volume range for assistance exercises is going to be pretty personal, and it's going to depend on how advanced you are. So, if you're deadlifting in the mid 4s or the low 5s or something like that, there's going to be a pretty good chance that you're going to be fairly, volume sensitive, or at least, the threshold of volume that you can play with is going to be different depending on what your structure is for the week. So let's say if you're doing deadlifts and then squats the next day, your deadlift will be able to interfere with your squat. So you're going to have to be more careful with your volume selection there. Start more conservatively than you think you need to. So with that, even just adding 2 to 3 sets of something in a similar rep range for your volume work, and then going from there, kind of slowly titrating that up over time. You're not in a rush. If you were in a rush, you should have started training 30 years ago. So with having that extra opportunity for time, you need to start overly conservatively and kind of LP up the volume for the assistance exercises, just like how we do that with weight. See Jeremy H in here. Anybody else getting choppy video? My feedback seems fine. Also, try to determine when to go up in a weight is a good idea. Keep upping the weight by 10 pounds. For example, 235 squats are feeling heavy, but I can complete them. Jeremy, for that one, you're going to have to, I would definitely recommend watching a video of your own film first. It's very possible that, the 235 squat that you're doing may feel heavy, but it's actually quite light. The bar speed may be moving fast. So what coaches are looking for whenever we're kind of using like descriptive scales like RPE or reps in reserve, or even just kind of a general intensity, we're looking at a variance in bar speed between your rep 1 and your rep 5, or whatever your, terminal rep is. So when you're getting to know a lifter and on their first day, when they're just learning the movement, kind of relatively how fast they are, that's going to be pretty consistent for the duration of their lifting career. So with that, I would definitely video yourself, watch your videos. If it's looking like you're dramatically slowing down towards, reps 4 and 5, almost where the bar is like kind of pausing or stalling at certain points in the lift, then you'll know that it's actually getting pretty hard. But if it's moving consistently and it's not really slowing down at any point, I would say a 10-pound jump on the squat isn't unreasonable. But again, you have time. So 15 pounds a week versus, 30 may seem a little bit drastic, but, you should be training for a number of years. So for, upping the weights by 10 pounds versus 5 pounds, things like that, Be brave for a little bit, because you could be pushing yourself, or you should be able to push yourself harder than you think. Rip always says, like, don't give yourself permission to fail a set. So it is pretty important to, every once in a while, take out a weight that you're not sure that you can hit, and then just really go for broke on it. So let's move on. So we had a few questions, 3 or 4 actually, about non-barbell exercises to do in lockdown, and then how exactly to judge these sorts of workouts and exercises with the same type of rigor that people do with starting strength. So, like, the really great thing about starting strength in the moment model is that we've pretty thoroughly laid out. You're welcome, Jeremy. We've pretty thoroughly laid out kind of a series of criteria for selecting our exercises, and then with that, kind of a good kind of mechanical and physics-based argument as to why we do them that way. You can also do that with gymnastics work and bodyweight training. If essentially you just pretend that barbells don't exist, you're still going to be dealing with the center of mass, you're still going to be dealing with gravity vectors, but instead of having it be applied to a barbell, it's going to be applied to your body. So on top of that, it's going to really depend on your current level of physical fitness. So if you can already do, a pretty strict push-up and a chin-up and a pistol squat, you're going to have a lot more options than you would, let's say if you're 2 weeks in the LP and you can't really do a chin-up, you can maybe do 1 or 2 push-ups, and a pistol squat is definitely well outside of your range. So essentially, you need to figure out where you're starting from, and then from there, rather than adding weight, the focuses that you're going to be doing are going to be adding reps, adding more sets, adding more volume that you're going to be getting through the session. And then once you're more comfortable with that current progression, moving up to a slightly more difficult version of it. So let's say that, you're doing push-ups on your knees to start. You can do maybe 8 to 10 of them, increasing that, to 15 to 20, and then moving up to a more difficult variation, and then working those in kind of in tandem. So for a lot of people who are right now, who are working on like chin-ups and push-ups and like planche push-ups and things to that effect, they'll be doing both variations at the same time. So a lot of them, let's say that for like a chin-up, they'll be doing 1 set with a weighted chin-up, and then more unweighted or bodyweight reps later on in the session, as well with pistol squats. So it's like if you're working on pistol squats as a skill, doing a few sets of pistol squats is kind of skill practice, and then from there moving on to things that don't really require much, like a lunge or a bodyweight squat, holding whatever you can. So what the goal is to find where you are kind of on the skill progression, a wealth of exercises that you can do, that you, really, unless you're a very strong and relatively lean person to start, you should be able to progress for a pretty long time on them, especially like the hollow body, the planche progressions, the handstand progressions, things like that. So next thing. Also, anybody else in the chat, feel free to post questions in the chat. I know Jeremy did. If one pops up, if it kind of matches, I'll hop into that one pretty quick. So the next question we got was from Jason. Jason, him and his wife just seem to have started the starting strength NLP, and she is worried about her knee position. So it seems like she's getting a bit of knee valgus when she's squatting. She says she has weak knees and is afraid they will explode when she executes proper form. She's never asked a doctor about her knees or been diagnosed with any knee problems, and they don't bother her in everyday life. Can you offer any mental or technical advice that might help her? The first thing is going to be identifying knee valgus and establishes this is what is actually happening. So the first thing with this is that knee valgus is going to be defined as the adductor group, so kind of the groin muscles pulling your knees in on the squat, normally as you ascend. It's pretty rare to see this on the descent. And essentially what this is that the adductors are winning in the fight or in the relationship with like the external rotators and abductors on the outside of the leg. So the cues for this, which is why we tell everyone to point their toes out about 30 degrees, and then shoot the knees out to the side. I talked about push-ups, don't have great push-up strength at all. Yeah, that's a good question, Chelsea. I'll get to that once I'm finished with this knee valgus thing. So with that, there are a lot of people who start having knee valgus because they're pushing their knees out too far. So let's say if this is the position of the foot, they'll shove their knee well outside of it, and the knees will shoot back into a neutral position, and then people will see that knee movement, and then we'll start to think that that in itself is knee valgus, when in actuality, they're just returning to the neutral position. So the first thing is going to be identifying if it is actually knee valgus. And the next thing is that, everyone will have a fatigue-based error. Really, everyone will. It's going to be different. For me personally, it's going to be having my upper back get soft in the squat. For other people, it's going to be knee valgus. For some people, it's going to be letting their knees slide forward. Jason, for your wife, it could be that this is just her fatigue-based error. It's just going to be knee valgus, or really just kind of like strength, and they'll tend to crop up in the later sets and the later reps. So with that, that's one of those things where like the best way to not have knee valgus when she's squatting, let's say 115, is to have her have knee valgus when she's squatting 145. So when she's warming up at 115, she won't have it at all. So essentially, just get stronger, and those things should correct themselves. In terms of like weak knees or them exploding or any sort of like damage, I wouldn't really worry about it too much. We're pretty resilient, and unless it's like very dramatic, and you'll know if it's dramatic because it will look very weird. Then at that point, that's something definitely get checked out by a coach. But otherwise, just keep having fun with it. Don't focus on the form overly much to the point where training isn't fun, because that's really the big goal there. So talking a lot about push-ups. I don't have great push-up strength at all. Any tips on helping to get through those without my wrists hurting so much? So that's going to depend on your wrist position. I definitely recommend something like a push-up handle. There's a lot of those. So essentially, they just look like a small parallel, just kind of like a U that you can place on the ground, put your hand on. It's going to feel more similar to a barbell. Those are great. The gymnastics suite really relies on a lot of straight arm strength and a lot of wrist conditioning strength. So, talk to somebody who has a pretty good gymnastics background. They'll be able to introduce you into straight arm and then straight wrist work, kind of how to get your wrists strong enough to do things like push-ups and handstands and the like. That's a process that it definitely takes an amount of time to get used to. But for now, try and find a position that's comfortable. For some people, it's having a more open hand. So I know some people, they'll put like an object, like a roller coaters or something in their hand just to keep it open and press up on their fist. Other people, they'll press just like this. Other people on the push-up handles. So find something that works. Training is always better than not training. And if wrist pain is the limiting factor, just start searching for other options with it. But definitely look into gymnastics, straight wrist work, and straight arm work. So. And Jeremy, will the app ever allow other Oli lifts like snatches? So I think you're talking about the novice app, the strength club app, the intermediate app. You can add, whatever exercise you want in there. The snatch normally isn't part, or at least the full snatch isn't normally a part of the standard novice linear progression. But if check out Strength Club, it's kind of the successor to the Starting Strength novice app. And then from there, you can add really whatever exercise you want in there. The snatch, unless you're in a position where you can't really rack a power clean due to like forearm length or shoulder flexibility or what have you, which is pretty rare for people not to be able to rack a power clean. That's really the only condition I would have someone do a power snatch, unless they're just interested in it. If you're interested in it, go for it. But just you can always just track it as a power clean in the novice app, or just move to Strength Club, Jeremy. So. Okay. Next question. This was an interesting one. This was by Stevie Strong. So he said, my goal outside of starting strength is to shoulder a natural stone that weighs 275 pounds. I'm just starting out with starting strength, and I'm wondering, what do you think my lift should be before I even attempt to lift the stone? Natural stones are really finicky. You're definitely going to have to find a community with strongman implements around you to get good at those and to have someone kind of teach you how to do a stone to shoulder. Just having a giant deadlift and attempting it is kind of a first run. It's going to be a little bit difficult. And by a little bit difficult, I mean almost impossible. So I would say for a 275 stone to shoulder, your deadlift's going to be in the mid fives, low sixes, fairly comfortably. My best natural stone has been around 220 pounds, and I weighed around 180 pounds at the time. And then with that, I have a pretty good amount of experience lifting odd implements. So that's one of those things where you're going to have to be pretty committed to kind of a career in strength to get a 275 stone to shoulder, especially a natural stone, because they can be, so wild and varying. Stone is a skill rather than kind of like a main course or an entree for something that you should be learning. So you're going to treat your deadlifts and your squats and benches and presses as staples, kind of your entrees. The stone is going to be a skill that you can express, that you can express your strength through. So with that, you're probably going to be well into, late intermediate advanced training by the time that a 275 natural stone gets all the way up to your shoulder. rather than just to your chest, because the difference between up to your chest kind of over a yoke or a bar versus up to your shoulder and kind of getting into the full like T position here, those are not miles apart, but they're pretty far, definitely pretty far. The movement has to be a lot more dynamic. You can really grind through a stone to your chest. It's harder to grind through a stone to your shoulder. But starting strength is definitely the right place to start because, you know, your goal of getting that stone up there is a purely strength-based goal. So starting strength is a really good place for that. You know, just eat your groceries, do your deadlifts, do your squats, and then that should sort itself out over time. Like I said earlier for that question, I would definitely recommend finding a community or at least a coach who is familiar with strongman implements and equipment. That way they can kind of guide you through that over time. But, you know, for the first few months, definitely just focus on getting just your strength up there. And then keep playing with it, you know, once a month, 2 times a month, go in, play around with the yoke, stones, things like that. So, okay. Next question, we got Evendwarfs. Suppose I can't go to the gym for a long time because of the current pandemic. I know that feeling. And I don't have room at home for a squat rack. How effective will front squats clean from the floor be as a substitute for back squats? Up the reps in lieu of the weight being lower. So this question can be expanded to a lot of things. So push-ups, chin-ups, really actually all exercise just in general, about how to kind of increase intensity and demand without increasing the amount of weight that you have in the bar. The reason that we do weight on the bar is because it is the most direct correlative to what we consider to be strength. So, you know, forcing it's an external resistance. So the most paired thing with that is going to be adding more weight to the bar. So every time add 5 pounds for the NLP. Now that you don't have the capacity to continue doing that, or at least safely, you're going to have to find other things to do. So with that, the clean is going to be the thing that throttles your front squat. So most people can front squat a lot more than they can clean. So depending on how technically adept you are at that, that's going to be kind of the throttling point for you. So let's say, you know, you can only clean up to, say, 185. I don't have too much information about you. If you can do that, you can probably front squat, you know, mid twos just fine. So from there, you're going to have to add in a lot of things. So you're going to have to either add reps, you know, add a tempo to it, add a pause. The pause doesn't just have to be at the bottom. It can be in the middle of the movement too. And essentially, you're just trying to get in as much work as possible. So let's say, you know, you're cleaning 2 or 3 times a week. You know, you're front squatting every time that you're cleaning that. You can even think about metrics like total sets for the week, total volume for the week at a certain weight. Just simply due to the frequency of times that you're going to be cleaning, you know, your proficiency is going to get increased at it, even if the technique is, you know, quote unquote ugly. So just try your best. I would definitely say push your deadlift. So if you have access to enough plates to push your deadlift, that should be your primary focus. And you're going to be using cleans and front squats as accessories to those. So don't think about it so much as, you know, driving up your squat and your deadlift separately. If you're not in a position where you can really squat heavy, you know, I know some guys, you know, who can probably rep their power clean weight out for like 20, 30 reps. And it's not because, you know, they're incredibly strong, just because, you know, they're not super great at the clean. So technically that's going to be the big limiter for you. If you have enough space to deadlift in, you likely have enough space to get a squat stand in. So squat stands can be separated. The Strength Co has a pretty good video and article series about that. If you have the vertical space for like a 5-gallon bucket, fill it up with concrete, put some uprights in there, and then you can put the bar in there. You can definitely squat in that. Or you could actually just buy some squat stands. Squat stands, you can probably get them probably about $100 a piece, I would say is fair. I wouldn't push super hard on them, you know, because you're not going to have safeties. And it's a little bit harder to bail safely out of a low bar back squat than is a high bar. The reason you'll see Olympic lifters kind of bail backwards out of it is because the bar is so high up in the traps, they can just slip their hands out from under it. To do it on a low bar back squat, you have to really kind of be squirrely to get your hands out and then push your chest through. That's a little bit harder. So I definitely recommend if you do have squat stands, do low bar safely. If you're pushing anything and you want to, you know, screw around with it, try high bar. So, okay. Next question is from the Josh. He says, I don't have much cartilage left in my knees after meniscus surgeries, so I'd rather not do power cleans if possible. Would Penlay rows be okay to do, or do you have another recommendation? What would the best set and rep range be to use? Thanks for your time and help. So you're welcome, the Josh. Depending on, you know, how your symptoms are presenting themselves, I wouldn't say that, you know, having a history of knee surgery is, a kind of counterindication for doing the power clean. That's a pretty personal choice for you. If you're just not interested in them at all and they just seem a little bit too risky for you, that's totally fine. Avoid them. I think there's a lot of utility in learning them from kind of an athletic standpoint of learning how to really commit to a movement and commit to something quickly. And also a big confidence thing. There's a lot of people who don't think they can power clean. You get them with the right coach in the room, they end up power cleaning and everything feels good. And then for them, that's definitely a big win. If you can't and just aren't interested in it, the pen lay row is a little bit different. So the way that we treat power cleans is going to be as a light pulling variation. So let's say that you're doing the LP. I'm not sure if you're intermediate or what, but we'll just use LP for the sake of programming example. You're squatting heavy and deadlifting heavy on Monday and Friday. In that Wednesday day, that's when you're going to be adding in a light pulling variation. So with a light pull, I don't really know if I would consider a pen lay row to really be that. Whereas, the mechanics between the power clean and the deadlift are similar enough, there's going to be a little bit of carryover there, at least in terms of skill. I know the absolute weight on the bar may be pretty different. But the pen lay row, I would consider that more of just kind of like a horizontal pulling, accessory, upper back hypertrophy, things like that. It's definitely helpful to do. Add them in just like you would with your chin-ups, but don't expect it to drive your deadlift at all. I would recommend just adding in light deadlifts if you're still early in the NLP. If you are into intermediate, just start doing more work. You can add in both. You can add in light deadlifts. You can add in shins. You can add in power cleans. Or not power cleans, but pen lay rows. In terms of best sets and rep ranges to use, if you're relatively strong, you can go for higher reps in that it will still be useful for you. So like a set of 8 for a guy who can only row 155 isn't going to be useful. But if a guy can you really use some leg drive and some body English, and he can row 275 instead of 8 for him at 215, 225. That'll still be really helpful for him from a hypertrophy standpoint and a strength standpoint. So if you're sufficiently strong, you can go for higher reps. They can get pretty taxing if you treat them like a power movement and you make them pretty fast. So for me, I weigh about like 180 pounds right now. I can do a not super cheaty, very leg-driven back extension row with like 275, 285. With that, they become more and more similar to the power clean, but I definitely don't think they're driving on my deadlift or anything like that. So it's going to depend on what flavor you want them for. So for hypertrophy work, higher reps, just get more volume in, or just treat them like a fun power movement and do for, a lot of sets, but for low reps. So next question, we got Martin Baltar. That's a cool last name. How do I adapt my training program to 2 sessions 3 times a week? The only way to be to train twice back to back. Ooh, connection's unstable. Okay. Would be to train twice back to back and then a 3rd session a day apart. So with the NLP, because I'm assuming, he's talking about linear progression for this. You got to think of a good, better, best situation and think about that really for all of the training decisions that you're ever going to make, is that everything that's going to be laid out in the books for you is going to be the best case scenario. So we're going to push for 3 times a week. We're going to push for all of these, hyper specific things. Your life, and even if it's not actually like you could, that's what will be optimal. But since we're not working for that, we're going for like a good or a better case scenario. We're going to go for 2 times a week. What I would do for that, I would keep them no more separate than 3 days. So doing like one session on Monday, the next session on Saturday is a little bit too far apart. I would definitely search to make them consistent, and I would bench press on both days. I would add press in with whatever spare time you have at the end. So let's say it's like Monday and then Friday, you're doing squat, bench, dead, and then whatever leftover time you have, add in pressing, and then add in chin-ups. Some people would say to alternate the press and the bench, but it's going to come to a certain point where you're only pressing once every 10, 11 days, and that's just not enough. So the more absolute or the higher absolute load on the bar for the bench press is going to make your life a lot easier there in terms of being able to more consistently drive up strength. Once you get sufficiently strong in the press, that's just not enough frequency to really get it done. So do both pressing motions each time, depending on how advanced you are. a coach would probably be helpful to manage all those loads for you. Even if you can fit in a very short, second or can be third session through the week, even if it's just 20 minutes to get in there and like superset some overhead press and some chins, that would be super helpful too. So you just do squat, bench, dead on your 2 primary training days, and if you can get in a third training day, make that overhead press and chins. So. Okay, next question, we got Paul. Any tips for those of us who don't have a squat stand, squat rack, or bench? Would building a squat stand out of wood be okay? Yeah, so actually the tail end of the blue book, if you made it that far, there are some good plans for, there are definitely some good plans for a squat rack, which doesn't take too much, engineering acuity to make. I definitely recommend doing that when it's very sturdy. It's pretty big too. If you can't, check out the Strength Co squat stands. It's kind of, they use I think I said that earlier in the stream, but they use a 5-gallon bucket, fill it up with concretes and some timber for uprights. And you can, you have to be pretty careful about where exactly you're placing the pins, or to me, the hooks, to match for your height. And if you're squatting with another person, it's going to maybe a little bit awkward unless you guys are the same height. But otherwise, I would definitely say check those out. I know that right now there's probably, I want to say 3 or 4 companies who make racks that will extend outwards from a wall, especially like a garage wall, that don't seem to be too super expensive, maybe a few $100. I would definitely look into that too. But building something out of wood is definitely okay. I think that granted you're using sufficient kind of tie-ins for everything and securing everything with like enough screws and bolts, that should be really okay. Just make sure you're not skimping out on like safety bars, or to me, safety arms if you are using them. If you aren't using safety arms and it's just the stands themselves, be overly conservative on big attempts. Just take out what you can get it for what reps and then just get more volume in lieu of pushing the intensity to an area where you may fail a rep. So failing a rep low bar, especially without a power rack, is a little bit tricky. So this next one's pretty interesting. This is from Elijah. Because of having cerebral palsy and using a forearm crutch, I've been using the Rappel barbell strap to do my squats and deadlifts. My question is that since the strap basically makes my squat a front squat and takes the arm out of play of my deadlifts, should I still use the form that is suggested in deadlifts, or to me for squats and deadlifts in the starting strength book, or use a different technique? He is currently 39 years old, 5'5", at 220. So I'll take a little sip of water. So Elijah, this is going to depend on the functionality of the arm. This would be a really interesting one to see. So since you're using a forearm crutch, it's clearly not like, horribly like denervated or not unfunctional. It still has some element of function. So if there's some amount of strapping that you can do to attach the bar to your hand, like with a figure 8 strap, I would definitely recommend doing that. That way you're still training a lot more of the upper back and arm musculature, rather than just hanging it off of your neck with a Rappel barbell strap. If you are using the Rappel barbell strap for your deadlifts, the mechanics for your back position are going to be relatively similar. Your hip height may change more than you think it's going to change. So you're still going to have the constraint that the barbell can't pass through your shins. So the problem is it's going to want to drift away from you. Our lats, and the reason why our shoulders need to be slightly in front of the bar, is that it's going to pull it in at an angle roughly about 90 degrees, and it's going to help the bar stick to our legs. If you aren't able to do that, depending on what the arm situation is, the Rappel barbell strap is just going to want it to have it hang plumb. So since it's hanging plumb, it's going to have to change your entire position. You're probably going to have to take a lower position with your hips, have your knees a little bit more forward, and it's going to physically, probably uncomfortably drag all the way up your leg. If you take a higher hipped position with this, it's probably going to drift forward of the midfoot because you don't have your lats to pull the bar back into your shins. If you can get one hand on the bar and pull it back in, that'd probably be pretty cool. Unless, it'll tilt out. It'll start kind of like a seesaw or a lever off of one of your shins, depending on which side your arm is pulling back on. So I would say, even if you can use the Rappel barbell strap and have your hands somewhat on the bar on the left and the right side to keep it more stable, that would definitely be great. But Yeah, we would essentially really just need to see how the functionality of the arm actually is before making a big determination about your deadlift. For your squat, I would probably say use a safety bar squat more so than a barbell strap for this one. If you have access to a safety bar, Titan makes a good one for like 100. I want to say it's like $200, I think. Um, I would definitely recommend starting there rather than the barbell strap. And the technique is basically pretty much exactly the same. Um, since it's going to be a standard barbell or a more standard barbell, it's going to follow all of the rules that the rest of starting strength follows. So we're going to want to keep the weight midfoot. Your back's going to need to be leaned over according to length of your torso. We're still going to want the knees to be shoved out, everything like that. So I would definitely say that the safety bar squat is probably your best bet, more so than the rappel barbell strap. Unracking it may be a little bit tricky. You may want to like climb out on a certain side. But I've had like some guys who don't really have a few missing fingers, and essentially those kind of like pull down onto the handles with this portion of their hand or the bottom of their wrist to kind of keep the safety bar on there. And then people also do Hatfield squats with them, so their arms are completely off the safety bar and they can still manage to keep it on there. So I definitely say the safety bar squat is probably your best bet there. So, okay. So next question, we got Z. So running starting strength, I've noticed that when the weekend ends, I've come back weak, tight, and unstable on Monday. Adding a light day in between my heavy days results in the same, making Monday and Friday harder, which leads to failing usually. Is this a personal thing? Can I fix this? I usually get to 270 pounds before adding a light day, but if I get to 270 on Monday, after a light day, I almost always fail. I'm getting 8 hours of sleep plus calories are 5,000. My current weight is 195 and gaining. Okay. So Z, you've pretty clearly answered the first three questions, or at least hopefully have in terms of calories and sleep and things like that. The next thing would be reasonable jumps. The nature of this question is making it seem as if you've been attempting the LP for a while. So you kind of worked up to 270, backed off, worked up to 270. If you've done that more than twice, it's time for more complex programming. It's definitely time to kind of switch up the pace of what you're doing. Continuing to run at it without changing too much, you're not going to get any sort of separate result other than what you have been getting. The thing that I would say in terms of coming back feeling like you're weak, tight, or unstable, I would probably say it's going to be the habits that you have during those times. I know for a lot of people, like including myself, if I take a weekend completely off, I will be a little bit worse on Monday if it's lifting or sports or whatever have you, simply because my behaviors, if you're just sitting down the entire time, you're not getting your good calories in or good food, or even just being like almost too inactive, not really kind of doing like the amount of standard, X amount of steps you normally need a day to kind of stay loose and limber. So I would address your weekend habits. Next thing would be sleep and calories on the weekend tend to be a little bit trickier. You could still be hitting your 5,000 target, but it could be coming from like alcohol and cheesecake rather than protein. So just cover your bases there. But with 5,000, you're probably getting enough protein in no matter what you're doing, unless you're just drinking straight olive oil. So with that, I would definitely say it's probably a programming problem. Move on to early intermediate programming, or even just dive into intermediate programming. You could just be a person who needs to train a little bit more times a week, so split up some of the intensity. So instead of hitting 2 10 out of 10 intensity days a week, split that up, to 3 or 4 sessions a week, but kind of, pull your volume back, increase the frequency. Essentially, all that is that this phenomena is happening with you in relationship to your programming and how you're feeling. So with that, you just need to find a way to work around it. So it may not be the textbook solution as to what to do in terms of the world of programming, but if it works for you, it works for you. So if I were coaching you, I'd probably add in another day of training, pull the intensity back on at least one of your days. So you're having more of a volume day, more of an intensity day, and then maybe 1 or 2 other squatting days, using a variation that you can still kind of throw yourself at. So, okay, next question. We got Rebecca. How do I start my journey to become a strength coach, or to become a coach for strength training? I'll talk a little bit about how I got my start, and then hopefully that'll give you some good information. Decide that you want to start not out of any sort of hyper-specific logistical circumstance. Start coaching because you just start no matter what. So like if you're doing athletic activity and you find yourself being put into a leadership position or a coaching position, that's a pretty good sign. I personally myself coached grappling for maybe, I want to say 6.5 years before I started like rigorously coaching barbell activity. And then with that, I kind of really cut my teeth on how to talk to people, how to get people to kind of, follow you and do what you need them to do, and kind of take them out into deep water with you. And then also to learn what you expect yourself out of coaching, because it's not super glamorous in the manner of, you're asking people to do something to better themselves. It's kind of the tyranny of the good, in that you want people to be as motivated as you are, and kind of as excited as you are for you to improve and for them to improve. And a lot of times there's a big disconnect on them not feeling that same exact thing, and then with that can be a little bit disheartening, especially at first. So through college, I coached grappling, so like judo, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, and participated in those. And then whenever I left, got into the corporate world, I started doing more rigorous barbell training with that. In terms of like a more real answer for you, you're going to have to find a content or information source that you really trust and that you think is more correct. It doesn't matter if it's actually correct. It's just some place for you to physically start. So, I would definitely recommend the Blue Book, and then the Gray Book. So Starting Strength and Practical Programming. And then once you read those thoroughly, you'll know what to read next. With that, it's going to be a lot of physics, a lot of, physiology, and then more programming books. I read a ton of programming things that I fundamentally disagree with. I think, they're suboptimal, but just more or less to get more people's perspective on it. So things like Zatsiorsky's two-factor model, a lot of the periodization stuff that, USA Powerlifting puts out, and then the authors that they reference. Essentially, you're just aiming to get as much information as you can in as possible. And then with that, reference the first order stuff. So reference, your mechanics and your physics, reference your knowledge of physiology, and then consolidate that with the facts that you're hearing from everyone else, or the facts of what people are saying about programming and the like. And then you'll kind of be able to sort out or titrate what information is true. Your job as starting a coach is to be hyper speculative about all the information that you're getting. So Tim Netting, good info, good podcast. All right, see you, Tim. Hopefully we're going to make this a somewhat more of a frequent thing. We'll get some SSCs on here, do a kind of a Q&A session. We'll collect questions through the week, and then we'll just send it out to all the people who are on the Starting Strength app, Strength Club app, and the Reddit, and things like that. So, tell a friend, submit some questions. So definitely have a lot more to get through. So. Okay, next one. Chelsea. I think this is Chelsea Pushup, Chelsea from earlier. What's the most efficient way to lose body fat while lifting without causing myself to struggle to put up the bar? Keto helped me lose 20 pounds. Congratulations. But I obviously had a massive struggle with lifting during that time. I am nowhere near my ideal body weight yet and do not want to do keto again. How do I lose fat in a similar way and still lift? Okay, this may be a similar question. With nutrition and sleep being, say, 80% on point, what time frames do you usually see a 40-year-old guy having to transfer from a novice program to an intermediate program? We'll do Chelsea's first, then we'll hit up your question, Elijah. So, Chelsea, it's really going to depend on what type of habits that you've managed to build up during keto. So if you feel that you have a pretty good basis for discipline, and if you do keto and you can really kind of hone in on your dietary choices and eliminate all carbs from your diet, you've obviously shown to yourself that you are able to follow what you want to follow. So from that point, it's starting to get things, again, from that good, better, best situation, from following anything to now following something that's more optimal. I would recommend starting with Santana's article, Sir Robert Santana. He's one of the authors for Starting Strength. I believe he's an RD. He has a lot of really good content out there on the backing and the science for what exactly you need for barbell training. There's a lot of options for you to go to. That you need to be in a calorie deficit. The game that you're playing from that point on is what type of calorie deficit can you agree to with your personality and your type of life. So if you're a type of person where it's like the ritual for breakfast is really important for you, intermittent fasting and skipping breakfast is probably not the best idea. If you're the type of person, who has kind of a pretty big ritualistic dinner with like a loved one or, romantic partner or what have you, and that's kind of a big social ordeal in your life, intermittent fasting may actually be a good idea for you. In terms of the science behind it, is that going to give you a slightly more suboptimal pattern for either lean mass gain or lean mass loss? Sure. But again, you're trying to reconcile all of the facts and kind of the reality of the situation with your personality, more so than trying to match your personality to the science behind it. Because personality changes and kind of behavioral changes are the things that take the most amount of time. So with that, it's definitely a long-term process that you need to learn more about yourself with. So for me, I think the thing that I find the most successful for my personal dieting is removing the most fat that I possibly can. So changing my cooking methods, changing my food selection, to drop my fat intake down to maybe 50, 60 grams a day. And essentially from there, I just kind of throttle carbs up and down. So Santana has a pretty good article on protein needs for barbell training, depending on your goals. So start there, figure out how much protein you need to be eating a day, depending on how much lean body mass you have now. I'm guessing it's going to be between 120 to 150 grams. And then from there, you're just kind of going to play that ratio between carbs and fat. I know in a low carb diet, a lot of people feel really gassed. They can't, muster the energy to get into the bar and do well. So with that, you're probably going to be one of those people who has to keep fat relatively low and pump the carbs up high. So the good news with that is those you can eat like skim milk and cereal. So, okay. Next question. Oh yeah, we'll do Elijah's real quick. So with nutrition and sleep being 80% on point, what time frames do you usually see a 40-year-old guy having to transfer from a novice program to an intermediate program? It's really going to depend. I don't think that age is a really good determinant here. I've had like 55-year-old guys who were just like athletic. They were just studs when they were younger. They stay on an Elvis program for 3 months. They end up with giant lifts. And I've also had like some people who are in a similar age group in the masters lifters who run out of their LP, in a month and a half. I definitely don't think age is the best determinant for this, rather than just, athleticism for whatever that means. But you'll know it pretty soon. Like if your first day squat is 75 pounds, you're going to be in a different situation than if someone's first day squat is, 185. It's kind of a blanket. I would say your sleep is going to be a little more important than your nutrition on this one, because I've noticed that has the most repercussions on kind of your mood during exercise. So kind of your perceptions of fatigue. And then on top of that, kind of discipline commitments through the rest of it, So like if you can set your day and your life up so that you're getting pretty solid sleep, the rest of it tends to be a little bit easier because you tend to have more kind of like mental energy and more emotional capital to handle the things that you need to handle. So I would say, novice to intermediate, doing it correctly, 2.5 to 3 months, I would say, is a pretty safe average. If you're handling someone who's a little bit more athletic, you can actually run that process out shorter to get them into an intermediate stage where they're doing a lot of work and sooner. It just kind of really depends on your goals, if they're doing another sport, things like that. So, having a coach to talk with you through this process and monitor all that would definitely be helpful. So, okay, so I got one from NHS. So, whoever NHS is, can you show some close-ups and specifics of the compression grip? When gyms used to be open, I can't seem to find the correct line of the radial longitudinal crease. I feel as if I am pronating too much or not pronating enough. I feel the bar move in my hand. How hard do I pinch? How much wrist extension is correct? I find my wrist extension is fine in the press, but in overextension in the bench, so I'm reluctant to use it for the bench press. First question is, I would be interested to see what secondary grip you're using for the bench press. I mean, if you're using a thumbless, suicide grip, quote unquote, I would definitely shift away from that. So the biggest thing that I would find for the bench press and why people have a hard time conceptualizing compression grip there would be that they think that their wrist is supposed to be more neutral than it is. So we are aiming for, 10 to 15 degrees of wrist extension. So let's try and line this up with the camera. If this is, zero, it's not even zero, this is actually a little bit of flexion, but if this is what we see as straight, we're actually looking for about this much extension. So with that, you can kind of see that it's lined up right directly through my palm. Okay. So Jordan Feigenbaum has a really good article on this called Gripping Matters. That may be the one in the squat, but if you just look up Feigenbaum on the Strength Training website, it will be a very, very, very detailed essay on about the grip for the compression grips. Normally, the bench press is going to require a little bit more extension than the press, and I think that has to deal with the absolute load on the bar in terms of just habits as well. So with that, aim for about this much extension, I would say. Sign this up with the camera again. This much extension, most people think it's here and it's kind of falling out of their hand. It's kind of that pronating too much thing. So make sure you're getting a proper amount of extension in there. And the next thing is I've noticed that whenever people are attempting to pull their elbows into the side, it's rotating their whole forearm, and then they're kind of getting that feeling that they are pronating a little bit too much. So letting your elbows flare a little bit more, touching a little bit higher on the chest is going to allow you, to kind of rotate through to a position where the wrist extension is more comfortable for you. It's very possible that it's, textbook perfect right now, or it looks textbook perfect, but it just doesn't feel exactly right. So with that, take some footage, post it, to the Reddit I hang out over there, the Facebook group. There's a lot of guys in the Facebook group, or the actual starting strength forums in the technique section. To get a good angle on that, you're probably going to have another person like actively kind of placing the camera over the hand, get a few angles on it while you're doing your set. Because if you're taking that angle from the straight side, they're just going to see the plates, and you have that standard oblique. It's normally a little bit too far away and too low resolution to see exactly what's going on with the wrist. So having a buddy for that is probably going to be pretty helpful. So, okay. This is a good one. This is by Bert. Every model of the physical world has imperfections and limitations. What, in your view, is the most serious limitation of the starting strength model of the barbell lifts? I think it really kind of depends on the answer that you want here. In practicality, the amount of emotions that get tied up into it, because I think that the way that we analyze lifting in people who aren't even tied to starting strength, but kind of think in the same way, are tied to it, are very, very caught up in being right, and very much kind of like an actually personality, like, hold on, wait, this hyper specific technical detail with it, and don't really take it for what it's worth. A lot of people are almost, I don't want to say, obsessed, but too focused on hyper technical or very grainy and very high resolution pictures inside of the model itself, and to think that one of these things is going to have an implication for 99% of people, or even half the coaches who are using the model. And even one of those, the theoretical implications or imperfections will have down chain consequences. The information is presented in the Blue Book, I think, is really, really good. I think it's the best thing out there. Otherwise, I wouldn't have pursued the SSC. And then with that, for most people, if they're, I think that one of the most common things that people talk about is like, do the what's it called? Do the lats actually need to pull at a 90-degree angle? Is the pennation angle of the muscle fiber going to change the line of pull depending on the mass of the lat? If the teres major or the teres minor can actually, take over that depending on their size. Like, definitely an argument can be made for something like that. Does that actually matter in reality? No, it does not. Does it matter for most coaches? Also, no. So with that, that's one of those things where, depending on the level of resolution that you need to operate at, the model is going to be incredibly useful no matter what. So I would say that the biggest, I don't want to call it a limitation of it, but one of the biggest problems that I've had with the starting strength model is how people like to discuss it. It seems like people are almost eager to find criticisms of it, as opposed to taking it, for what it's worth, just being like a very useful system for training. So when the moment model itself, I think that's been like scrubbed through by a lot of engineers, a lot of physicists, and I think it's come out of the other side a lot more stable and a lot more sturdy than most things have. So, Chelsea, time for me to go lift. Enjoy your lift. Yeah, absolutely, of course. Let's see if we had any other questions pop in during this. We got a few people in here, but we'll definitely post all of this up at the end. We're about 50 minutes in so far. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to post those. The only other thing that I wanted to cover in a lot more depth is going to be the options or the type of training that we can all be doing, in quarantine without too much equipment. If you have someone who you live with, don't underestimate the capacity to use another human as weight. So like kind of like a loaded carry with them. people have been doing that in the wrestling and the grappling world for a very long period of time. You know, like take a cable grip around them, pick them up, run for 20, 30 yards with them, or even just like buddy squats. You know, so give someone like a not a piggyback ride, but their legs around your shoulders. I was just doing that with my wife, ripping out a few sets of 20. It's not really the most pleasant thing for them because they're just kind of get a little bit bored. Hopefully, they have their phone up there with them. You know, but there's a lot of ways to overload the legs and the posterior chain. Training the pushing musculature, so training things like a push-up and a dip, tend to be super easy without, you know, formal equipment. You know, so things like even if you're using 2 bar stools or, you know, 2 chairs to do dips, that's always really great. You can do a ton of push-ups. You can do pull-ups on most things. I know a lot of people have been talking to me like, hey, I don't have a pull-up bar. I don't have a dedicated chin-up bar. What do I do? You know, if you live, you know, probably within a mile of a tree, there's definitely going to be a chin-up bar on there somewhere. So you got to get a little bit creative with it. I know that some people have been using like 5-gallon buckets filled with like concrete for like a weight that you can use for other farmer carries. You can put them on a pipe or into a dowel. But in terms of like pulling musculature, if you have something you can hang off vertically, it's very rare to find someone who is like lean enough and strong enough that pull-ups are not going to be an issue for them. So if chin-ups are really easy, move to pull-ups. If pull-ups are really easy, move to archer pull-ups. If those are really easy, move to one-handed variations. You know, if you're already doing one-handed variations, you are a rock climber. I know a lot of them. Most people aren't them, you know, just to put it super lightly with that. So a lot of people have a lot of ways that they can press in terms of vertical pulling and then even horizontal pulling, you know. So if you're starting with like a table row or something like that, and where you get under the table and pull yourself up to it in kind of an inverted position, you can get a tremendous amount of upper back work done like that. And the next thing would just to be to push the pace. So normally a lot of us get used to doing heavy barbell stuff. So, you know, you'll do a heavy barbell movement, you know, you'll wait 3 or 4 minutes, you'll just kind of pace around the gym. And then you'll go from there. With bodyweight stuff, you can push the pace a lot, you know, so like do a set of chin-ups, you know, do a set of lunges, do a set of push-ups right afterwards, just run through that circuit, you know, as much time as you can for the next hour and a half. You'll definitely get a good workout in. And for a lot of people too, it's going to be a pretty novel stimulus. So it's going to be hard. You're going to see a lot of high return on it sooner rather than later because of how novel it's going to be. It's going to be pretty fresh. And with that, you're probably going to see some definite hypertrophy. Granted, you are still eating correctly. You know, tension and heavy loading is what we're going for. But you can make most of the bodyweight exercises feel very heavy, you know, depending on how exactly you're doing them. So like with a push-up, doing something on your knees versus doing like a planche push-up where your shoulder is significantly farther in front of your hand. And if you can do a weighted planche push-up, you know, you're in a very small percentage of gymnastics, or to me, gymnasts who can actually perform one of those movements fluidly. So that's definitely something to look into. Start fooling around with the gymnastic stuff, and then pick the pace up. You know, now is definitely a good time to work in some conditioning. Do some GPP work for the next 2 months. That way, you don't have to do it for another year. But other than that, I think we're going to call this first Q&A session to a close. If anyone has any other questions, feel free to post them now. I'll answer those. Otherwise, we'll end this one, and then we'll just keep posting these, you know, once every few weeks. So, okay. Alrighty, I'll talk to you guys later.